Mark Ingall, leader of Harlow Council, recently on a council meeting you really stressed that with Covid-19 this is about resilience first really and recovery second. Do you still stand by that?
Very much so. I think we're all looking for a recovery. We're all desperate for recovery. We want this to be over. We want life to return to normal. But the incidence of coronavirus at the moment is still high and growing. I think yesterday there were 55 new cases in Harlow. There are well over 100 live cases. So whilst we look forward to recovery, we must be focused on resilience now and doing everything that we can, all of us individual citizens and as a council and businesses working together to try and stop this virus becoming even more serious.
And your day-to-day job as the leader of the council here, you know, who we are in the Water Gardens, does it cast a shadow, or is it the highest priority of everything you do?
It overshadows everything we do. We try and push forward with our programme. We're still ambitious for Harlow, but things are harder to achieve. We have still 90% of our workforce working from home. We and the organisations that we speak with, many of them are working from home, and so the logistics of trying to move things forward are harder, and everything must come second to keeping people safe.
There was one statistic that came across from the interview we recently conducted with your deputy leader Jenny Harvey and the leader of Harlow Conservatives Andrew Johnson, was this figure of the 16,500 people on furlough. Does that concern you?
Well, that represents a third of Harlow's adult working age population, and it's of deep concern. Harlow is a low-wage economy for the southeast of England, and we've been working hard to try and improve the wage levels in Harlow. Harlow Council, for example, only ever works with companies that pay the real living wage. So the thought that people who have perhaps only just managed in the past could now be much worse off when they lose their job or their hours are cut has to be of concern to everyone.
How closely do you, I mean, it was good to see in the recovery and resilience group, and even that meeting, you see the Labour and Conservative work together. Was that a one-off? Do you feel both parties are working together on this? Because you're quite a harsh critic of the Conservatives, aren't you?
I'm a very harsh critic of the Conservative government. I think they've failed this country. I do believe that the Conservative councillors in Harlow want to do the best for their residents. I don't think they're intrinsically bad people, but where we can work together, we do work together. And in fact, ever since I became the leader, I've worked behind the scenes with the leader of the opposition, Councillor Johnson, and with our Conservative MP, Robert Halfon.
Do you think you do work with Robert Halfon? Because sometimes they might have a meeting where it all feels, you know, everybody's got on well together, and then you'll go on Twitter and try and blast Robert Halfon out of the water. Do you think that does any good? I think
my Conservative opposition here are very keen to highlight the importance of opposition, scrutiny and opposition. And I think what's sauce for the goose here in Harlow has to be sauce for the gander in Westminster. And Robert Halfon votes in a way that affects Harlow, sometimes negatively. So, for example, the permitted development rights 2, as I call it, supported by Mr Halfon, despite the fact that Terminus House has caused so much trouble and the other 12 or so permitted development office conversions have caused so much trouble for Harlow, he goes and votes again for permitted development 2. So I think it's right and justified to scrutinise his actions in Parliament and to make sure that that the residents of Harlow are aware of what he's doing.
But and I'm not a spokesman for him, he might counter that when say, well, I've actually got some major concessions of pledge, so it's not. Is it fair? Do you think Harlow politics are becoming incredibly tribal and he said, she said, and you have to be on one side or the other. You can't in between.
Let's just dig into that claim that he made. He's very proud and spoke to your newspaper about how he'd got concessions about space standards. But to be clear, had permitted development not been introduced by the government he was a part of, then all of these conversions would have had to come to planning and would have been subject to minimum space standards. All he's achieved there, despite the triumphant trumpeting of his achievements, all he's really achieved is a minor concession that, had the Tory legislation not sidelined planning would have dealt with anyway.
This developers' charter, we merge onto the developers' charter concern. So do you feel it will come to pass that developments that have been knocked back so far, even a 2-bedroom story extension that has been rejected by the committee, there was one recently, Mike Danvers said this is a bit of a swan song for us objecting to this. Do you really feel that there is a real danger that big, 2 stories is quite a lot, isn't it? Do you fear that these will now go straight through without any planning permission at all, stamped by Harlow Council?
Well, that's what the legislation suggests. And, these bills are carefully crafted, and it wouldn't be in the legislation if that wasn't the intention.
Can we go back to coronavirus, etc.? How closely in contact are you with the COVID Recovery Committee? Has councils on both sides, but organisations like CCG, Princess Alexandra, Public Health England, perhaps. Do you have a dialogue with them? Yeah,
the council has a dialogue with all of those organisations, and I personally sit on a committee called the COVID Local Outbreak Panel, which is leaders from across Essex, and Mike Gogarty, the Public Health England voice for Essex, sits on there. We meet every 2 weeks. We discuss what's happening in terms of the infection within the different communities in the county, and what actions we can take jointly to try and prevent the further spread of the disease.
One of the things that came across on cabinet meetings and the interviews with councillors Harvey and Johnson is trying to get Harlow Council, trying to get them more powers in respect of decision making to do with COVID.
Well, indeed, it's slightly frustrating. There are 1 or 2 and I need to say that most residents in Harlow have fully complied with the lockdown regulations in March and the further restrictions since the lockdown started to ease, and they deserve huge credit for that because it's been disruptive to their lives. But 1 or 2 pubs, for example, have not followed the regulations, and it's been quite frustrating having to provide evidence to Essex and wait for them to make decisions about what should happen in Harlow. And some of those powers have now actually been delegated down to Harlow, which means that the action can follow on much more swiftly. And let's remember, this virus spreads very swiftly, so it doesn't hang around for 2 or 3 weeks for us to present evidence to both the police and to Essex County Council, and for them to meet and talk about it and then feed back to us. The virus is spreading day by day.
And what about things like, we talk about the day-to-day running, but you're an elected councillor and there's 36 of you. Things like local council elections next May, will they take place? There's all sorts of things during the calendar year that won't,
I hope they will take place. Next May will be a big election for Harlow. 1/3 of our district councillors who should have been elected last May when the elections were cancelled will be up, and I'm one of them. The 4 Harlow based county councillors are up for election, and the Essex Police Fire and Crime Commissioner will be up for election as well. So it's a big election year for Harlow. It's a very important political year for Harlow, but it's also going to be very different. One of the things that I enjoy most about being a local councillor is knocking on people's doors and listening to them, and that's not going to happen.
But what about things you must look for a time when all those events that are in a calendar year for Harlow Council and its residents, carnival, fireworks night, events in the park, litter picks, park runs, lots of things. You must hope that one day, that perhaps next year, that they'll all take place again.
I think everybody's hoping for a return to normality and that service can return to normal.